my name is Leigh Toscan. I'm at Southern Cross Public School. Presently, I'm the learning support teacher. I basically implement the continuum of supports across the board from kindergarten all the way through to year 6. I have taken on instructional leadership roles as well, supporting mainly with literacy development across the school. In that role, mentoring teachers as well on how to support students and provide best practice. Basically, in my role as learning and support teacher, my principal brought it to the support meeting and said he had just heard about this collaborative response that came through from our local high school. They were doing it there. And so from that, I took the initiative to go and do further investigation and got online, sourced the book and did lots of reading. And then Alan was in contact with Curtis and Lorna and David Silcock as well, who's another connection for us. And we brought it to Southern Cross. And there's a number of schools within our area that have taken collaborative response on board. So it's quite good. And we can all sort of connect and learn from each other. Yeah, that's a little bit more challenging again. So those connections through the schools that are based on or are using collaborative response generally happen during our network times. We had another local school who was doing collaborative response who we were looking at connecting with. They had a few hiccups along the way, so they're going to rejoin the journey at a later stage. But definitely staying in touch via our Google Drive. The high school that I spoke earlier about, the learning support teacher there, who is another person who is driving that at that high school, we contact each other regularly and go, what are you doing? How are you doing this? I'm going to try this. Have you done that sort of thing? So we keep in contact, and that connection has been fantastic and has really helped me clarify points and how to deliver sort of certain aspects of meeting, or where to change things and to rethink continuum of supports, those sorts of things. So definitely that connection has supported us as a school as well. Yeah, I think that the connection with our local high school though is definitely one that's needed and will continue to occur to support the collaborative response journey we're on. And to be honest, I'm not sure it is that different. Obviously, the school structures are a little bit different and how we run our school systems and so forth. But ideally, the systemic sort of underlying notions of collaborative response is the same. We're still data-driven, student-focused. We want to make sure that we're meeting the diverse needs of all our students. Those elements are all the same, basically, across the board. Our structures and processes are evolving, I have to say. That's how I describe our what it's like at Southern Cross. As Curtis alluded to, success, is a journey and not a destination. And we are focused on the process there. But we have, at Southern Cross, we have very dedicated teachers, effective teachers who are just driven and strive to support our students. So that's sort of your mainstay. And I think, as you said before, best practice is best practice, and that's what our teachers want to deliver. So we have teachers who they want to make sure they're having a positive impact on our students. So the processes we have are the layered approach to all our meetings, as suggested by Curtis and Lorna. Last year, I took collaborative response on and sort of, if you will, had a little bit of a prototype happening. So I took one stage, as stage 2, which comprises of years 3 and 4. And I just went down the literacy route, focusing primarily on reading, and that was based on data from what I'd seen, and knowing that those years is where we start to see a bit of a slump in reading. So, and that is generally because the whole premise of learning to read and reading to learn sort of comes into play there. And those students who haven't developed all those word recognition skills, sort of those early strands of reading, the gap widens for them. So they're not up to building their vocabulary and building that language comprehension. So that's why that happens. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was being covered there. So hence why I took on stage 2 in my role in 2020 and brought collaborative response that way. So in our term, we have around 10 weeks. It's approximately a 10-week term. So we always met at the beginning because we have a 2-week break in between our terms. And then our summer break consists of around 6 weeks. So, and then we have 2-week breaks between our terms, and we have 4 terms a year. Yeah, so it's a roughly around 10-week break. So we met at the beginning to look at our data and just see when the students came back, we did some further analysis. So we looked at our benchmark data. The teachers had started to implement some teacher assessments. So we looked at that data as well. Go, okay, where do we need to progress, or do we just continue where we were on from last term? And then we sort of roll over again. And then at the end, we go, okay, do our evaluation while we're still having those sort of informal conversations along the way. So through that collaborative planning time, those informal conversations, well, how's it going? What do we need to tweak a little bit? And then week 8, we have those more formalised conversations. And during that, we looked at our data and saw some of the areas that we needed to work on. So we identified the key issues across the board. They were related to fluency and comprehension. And of course, those students who were still at that word recognition phase, they came into our Tier 3 model of interventions. So they were brought in through the learning support team, which I'll go through in a minute with you. But for those Tier 2 students, where we wanted to make sure that best practice was being delivered, what we did was we looked at fluency and comprehension. So that's what our data told us. So we brought in some reading practices to ensure that we covered those areas and built the students' knowledge in those. And the data that I've just sort of analysed is fantastic, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later as well. Yeah, so those other students there that were still in that word recognition, they came into our learning support meetings. So we had our collaborative response meetings, which came twice a term. Our learning support meetings were weekly, and that's where the teachers would put students on the agenda who required Tier 3 support. So, and then we went through a referral process where we looked at, well, what Tier 2 supports had been implemented, why weren't these working? So we did an evaluation of those, and then we looked at, well, what interventions there will support that student in their specific areas and support them to build them up and move their development onwards. Coupled with that, for the layer approach, we have staff meetings, which happen weekly as well, and stage meetings. So they're stage meetings for kindergarten, and then we have stage meetings for Year 1 and Year 2, Year 3 and Year 4, and Year 5 and Year 6 as well. So they happen on a weekly basis as well. So that's part of our process and part of our structures here at Southern Cross Public School. Well, as I said, that was part of our journey, just starting it off with stage 2, because I wanted to see what the effect of this is, because people can be resistant to change. So I think it's important to small steps, and then when you get that buy-in, they can then, those teachers who were part of it, just go, listen, these are the results we had. This is fantastic. This is because we were so student focused, and we looked at our data and we went, what's our key issue? We focused on that, and then we saw the development, we saw the growth. So they can actually sort of sell it for me. Whilst I did the prototype, so to speak, of stage 2, I'm taking it across the board to all stages this year across our whole school. And that will look a little bit different again in the delivery, because we'll be doing it on a weekly basis, but on that weekly basis, I will be alternating sort of the stages that I'll be speaking with at that time. That happens generally after school. We'll have to do it after school. Just because of our time constraints, it's really hard for us to put a meeting of this importance in school time, where it could be quite rushed and then we miss things, and there's a lot of value to this, and I can see it. I've got the evidence to that. So we need to make sure that we're actually spending quality time on this meeting. And to do that, we need to do it within our staff meeting time. So we'll have stages rotating. Coupled with that, I will then meet them sporadically through the term at their lunchtime meetings as well. So I will be meeting stages at least 3 times a term. I sort of took it by the reins last year and just went with it. I've got a lot to learn. I'm not saying I did a fantastic job, but it was good that I started small, I think, because there's little bits I'm going to be adding now, and those, it's an evolving piece of work. It's an evolving journey, as we've spoken about numerous times today, and that there's things I will definitely tweak and I can improve upon, and that will keep going. And I dare say I'll make many mistakes this year and continue to grow. To inform our collaborative response, what we do, we have what we call PAT data. So it's progressive the assessment testing. We do that twice a year. So we do that in term 2 and we do that in term 4. And that's sort of like your benchmark data. So we capture all the students. Having said that, the PAT data does a really in-depth analysis for us as well, which is fantastic. So we do all of that online, and then we can analyse the specific questions and go in deep and look at, well, what's actually going on for that particular cohort, and then that particular smaller group of students. Well, I can see this is a key issue, so this is what we can do with our practice, those sorts of things. So that was our PAT data. That was our sort of our standardised assessments, what we call here. On top of that, we also do diagnostic assessments. So we were looking at specific reading assessments, and they change obviously because of our reading culture and our reading practices have changed as a result of collaborative response and the further research I have done into reading. So I've done quite a bit into that, into the science of reading. So I've cultivated a new culture here in regards to reading as well. So I've taken that on, which has been a journey in itself. So we do decodables here, and we look at that word recognition, and we look at that language comprehension as well. So we have 2 different reading assessments for our students. Decodables are a type of reader, and they have an assessment that accompanies them. So that decodable, basically, it's supporting students to pull apart alphabetic code. And they use that. So we're looking at segmentation and blending and just that letter recognition and letter sounds and things like that. So a lot of our lower end students are are on those decodables, and the assessment that accompanies them, we do that, and it looks at, well, how well are they decoding now? What's their word recognition like? All of those sorts of things. So our other assessment, which we use, is Probe 2. Is a reading assessment that looks at vocabulary, looks at fluency, and looks at comprehension as well. So they're students who have passed that word recognition stage and are now more on that language comprehension stage. So last year, that's what we primarily used in conjunction with our PAT data. On top of that, we looked at teacher observations and teacher anecdotal notes during either reading conferences or small group reading time. And so we used that. We sort of really wanted to triangulate our data to make sure that we're getting a whole picture of our students. That was the data that we looked at, and we went, okay, let's go in further. What are our key issues as well? I think it's so important to triangulate that data. And I know I say it often at the school, but you need to have a well-rounded view of the student, not just on one occasion, but on various occasions. So if you get that data from numerous sources, you can sort of see, okay, yeah, whether it's consistent across the board or it's a one-off and they had a bad day on this day or whatever it might be. So you really need to make sure you have data from numerous sources. Developing the continuum of supports was a challenging, but such a good reflection opportunity for us as well, because we based it on, again, the prototype from 2020, and we looked at just continuum of supports for our reading practices. The journey for that, we started off looking, going to the staff and go, well, what quality practices are we already using? So we sort of created bundles of information there. These are the strategies we're using and so forth for primarily our tier 2, but some of our tier 3s crept in there as well. So we just looked at that. And then we went, okay, so we wanted to know, what should our universal practices be based on our knowledge of science of reading and best practice? So we then took all of that information and thought, well, okay, these are going to be our specifics for our universal practices that need to go across the board. that need to be seen in every one of our classrooms, because we know that leads to quality reading, and it is best practice as well. So we wanted to make sure that was delivered in every one of our classrooms. So they're our tier ones, so to speak. Moving down for our tier twos, we then looked at, well, what's our quality differentiated practices, just to offer that little bit extra support across the board for those students who might need to have less information on the page, or just varying the task a little bit for them to be able to access that information. So we came across, we sort of put our reading into what we call the big six. So we looked at phonics, we looked at comprehension, we looked at vocabulary, we looked at phonemic awareness as well, and we looked at fluency and oral language as well. And we looked at, okay, what are the tier two structures or tier two strategies to support students in this area that we can go across the board. So we accumulated strategies for that. We then looked at our tier three strategies and identified what are our main key issues within our student cohort, and go, okay, so these are the reading practices that we need to make sure that we're implementing to support those tier three students who are at least a grade or a little bit below, who may need just a little bit more support in word recognition or decoding, how to decode a text, or just aren't getting it with the comprehension. So do we need to increase their vocabulary? So we'll look at increasing their knowledge of our tier two words, things like that. And then of course our tier four structures, our more extensive supports there as well. So that come about, and we put the data together, put links within all of our continuum supports, and basically that's again a working document that is disseminated to all our staff, and will increase in information as it goes by, and things will be taken out that people might say, well, that wasn't effective at all, and that's absolutely fine, because that's the way it has to be. It has to be a working document. To change it up for this year, for 2021, well, I want to look at that more broadly, because we just focused on reading last year. So I want to see, okay, let's bring it in for writing, let's bring it in for maths. What do we need to do there? And look at continuum of supports across those areas as well, and then go further from there. But I really think, as I said previously, small steps is the way to go for us. It really did change, look at people looking at their practice, go, well, that's not how I do it, you know, and that's different to how I do it. And so it's about changing our mindset and looking at, well, you know what, this is just a little bit different, and this is what it can offer you, and those sorts of things. So it's important that that reculturing of understanding of how reading is developed, that really had to happen as well, and it's still happening. So it's still our journey. So those tier one, we're looking at, well, it's about making sure we do our modelling, making sure we explicitly teach those tier two words to our students, making sure that they have repeated opportunities to go over the text, because we know that leads to deeper comprehension, and not just reading a text once and then spurting out comprehension questions, because that doesn't lead or doesn't really show us much. We know we have to make sure that students are making effective connections in the text as well, and linking information, reorganizing information to be able to summarize that information and summarize that text as well. So those practices there, they are developing, and they will continue to. But it's exciting for all of us. I think it's an exciting journey, and even this year, the deputy principal and myself are doing another reading course. So again, and going further with our knowledge to even deepen everyone else's knowledge at the school. So yeah, that reflection of, okay, well, what actually have we done? It's needed. It's very much needed, because you need to go, well, what's my where to next? Because you need to know your impact. If you don't know your impact, you don't know where your where to next is, so to speak. So I think that's very, very important to do that reflection. So thank you. Yeah, definitely the challenges for last year to start off with was the whole timetabling. That was the major challenge. So in term one, when we started it, so term one last year, we had the lovely Curtis and Lorna come and join us and gave us the information. We started on our journey of collaborative response and creating a leadership team, and trying to get our heads around it to start off with. And then COVID hit, which was another story. So after COVID, and we were allowed to come back, which was fortunate, the whole timetabling of trying to get meetings happening was a challenge, because it was finding that time, because we weren't really allowed to meet in large groups. So our staff meetings were changed again. And as I said previously, trying to fit it into a day is tricky, is really tricky. So that was one of our greatest challenges, and the amount of time a meeting really needs to have to look at those solutions and look at the data and so forth. So that was my biggest challenge. To address that, what we did was we looked at grouping our release from face-to-face time. So we looked at grouping the teachers together whom we could. We had 4 teachers and only 3 release from face-to-face teachers. So it was, one sort of had to quickly go back. And so that was difficult in itself. So that was one way that we could address it. Another way was, after speaking with Curtis and Lorna, I looked at, well, how can I make this much more user-friendly for all of us, so no one's missing out? So we looked at basically, okay, this time we're just looking at this person's class and the key issues within that. And that's how we restructured it. So we're just looking at class A. These are some of the key issues. If you notice that you've got those key issues as well, take on board the actions that we're looking at to support those students, and you can try them out. And then when we talk about your class, then we can look at those actions and celebrate those as well, and how you went with them, and you can discuss it at that time as well. That was one of the most trickiest things, was the timetabling for us. But that visual support of the students, you have that wonderful software, We Collab. We don't have access to that at present. So I had to consider, well, how do I get that visual up? And it's still a work in progress. And I'm looking at it for this year, because I'm expanding it, just simply using PowerPoint to go, okay, yeah, these are the students who are below grade level. These are the students at or approaching. These are the students who are exceeding. And just moving our students' names around and looking at where they are on their tier levels, things like that. So that was another challenge, and which leads to space to have a collaborative meeting. So when we have a stage, we have anywhere up to 4 to 5 teachers. There'll be myself, there'll be another learning support teacher involved in that. I'm also looking at trying to get our SLSOs to stay back either once a term for one of those meetings as well. An SLSO is like a paraprofessional teacher's assistant here. And so bringing them, because they have, our learning support teachers have a wealth of knowledge, our SLSOs. They are fantastic and are simply great with our students. So bringing them on board, I think, is key as well. So I'm looking at trying to offer them some alternative time off if they can come to a meeting as well. So the space to hold that meeting and have those visual supports up as well is something that is definitely needed. I think you need to make sure you have that area as well. It's so beneficial to have that collaboration, to have that collective knowledge come together, because it's just not one person's knowledge. It's everyone has various experiences which you bring together, and you can just go, okay, this is what we can do, and this is what we can offer as a team to support our students. I think it's fabulous. 2 things stand out for me with this. There's obviously a lot more, but I want to mention 2 here. The first one would be the increase in teacher efficacy, because at the beginning, it was very much a case of, well, I sort of ran it, which was the way it had to be, I guess, to start off with, because I was new in this. But over time, it was reviewing the celebrations. You could tell that I did that, the teachers did that, or that was something I had that positive impact on those students. And then it became, well, look at what we're doing. Look at what we're doing within our collaborative response meeting, and that increased. So that building of professional capital was amazing. And the ability for teachers to go, you know what, this is my role, and look what I've been able to do with this student. So it's that collective knowledge I referred to previously, that building of that was absolutely sensational. And I'm not sure if the teachers involved saw that, but I could see that journey that they were going on. It was just like, I can offer this, and this is what I've done, and that was because of the celebrations that we acknowledged at the beginning. Definitely the celebrations and the understanding that we're building that professional knowledge, that professional capital together. That was one of the first rewards. The second reward is something I need to, is our data. I had to, when I was doing the analysis of the data, our growth was phenomenal. So when I looked at our below students who are in our lower bands there, they had increased by 18%. And then when I go up to my students who are in my higher bands, they had increased by 15%. That was in our year 3 cohort. In our year 4 cohort, when I was looking at the data there, the lower bands had increased by 11% in that, when I say, decreased by 11%. So their initial benchmark data was at 21% in our lower bands. In our term 4 benchmark data, it went down to 9%. So it actually decreased, that's what I should have said before. And in year 3s, the below decreased by 18%. So those students who were in my lower bands all pushed up into the middle bands, which was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Now the students in my upper bands there, or in the middle bands, pushed forward to the upper bands. So my year 4 cohort, they increased by 21%. So when I looked at the data, I could just see the evolution of students moving from those lower bands and pushing up to the middle, up to the high. So you could see that growth happening. So our goal now is, because we have a large middle chunk at the moment, I want to move them forward and go, well, what's the key issues within that middle band to push them forward as well. So that's where our practice is going to, that's what we're going to pursue in 2021, is get that middle bands and push them up, because our lower bands have crept up now, which is great. I was initially worried, thinking, oh, have we chosen our practices? But until you do until I did that final data analysis, I'm like, look at our effect. This is great. So our effect size is huge. So which is fantastic for us, because it just showed that those reading practices that we employed, which are all scientific and evidence-based, they work. It works. It's just common sense. And you've just got to look at those students and go, okay, it's that sort of drilling down and repeated reading and understanding the vocabulary. And you've really got to expose all that to the students, and just consistency and that mastery and overlearning, and it just worked. It just worked for our students, and it's what they needed, and I want to keep pushing that as well. Goodness, collaborative response, it shifted dramatically during COVID. So luckily we weren't as affected as you guys, which was thankful. Having said that, sort of collaborative response, whilst it, I have to say, it did take a back seat a little bit, because we're all in, I know I was in, oh my gosh mode, how do I support, what do I do, where do I go, sort of things. So the support came in that we weren't allowed on site, obviously, as a whole cohort. So we came in stage groups on site. So there was only 4 or 5 of us at that time, which we could socially distance as well. And we were able to meet at that time, and stage meetings occurred. And at that time, we looked at all our students, what's going on, because we really needed to know what was their wellbeing at the moment. So we needed to focus on that. That was our primary focus, was how are the kids going? Are they actually completing work? If not, why not? And then so we looked at, okay, phone calls and emails and all of those sort of connections that we all made with our students. So that happened on a weekly basis while we were out of school, off our site. So yeah, stage teams would meet, and then we'd talk about all students basically. Those students who had little to no attendance obviously got follow-up phone calls through leadership teams, and we discussed with parents and how else can we support you, what do we need to do, all those sorts of things. So I guess also prior to COVID, to make sure all our students were still accessing the curriculum, what we did was a technology audit. So we went through all our students and go, who's got access to technology, who's got a laptop, a desktop, what means, what's your how do you access it? Is it just hotspotting and all of those sorts of things? So we really had to do that technology audit, and our principal was lovely enough to be able to go, okay, these students don't have laptops, they can have school laptops. So they took home our school iPads or Chromebooks or laptops. So they had access to a device at home as well, rather than working on mum's mobile phone sorts of things. So that was fantastic. And that was really good that he was able to implement that at the beginning. So they went home, and most of our students worked via online platform, via Google Drive. And those students who could not, they were given a paper workbooks and things like that. And of course, regular check-ins via phone calls and things like that. On top of that, we did Google Meets with our students or Zoom meetings on a weekly basis, and sometimes even more so than that. And so we had groups of students and just having a chat. How are you going? What's happening? What are you doing today? And all those sorts of things, just to make sure we're touching base and checking in with our kids. It's been a common thread throughout my conversation with you, small steps. I can't emphasize that enough, because I know that when you get a whole cohort of teachers and a change, that this is collaborative response is a change, because it does change the structure of your meetings, and it does sort of make you want to, looking at that data, it can sort of, people can take that on board as a self-criticism as well. So you need to, we talked about relationships, you need to make sure you have that trust within that meeting time, that that collaboration, that knowledge of each other. And so that's a real, that can be confronting for some. So you need to make sure, for me, it's small steps, little bits at a time. And that's the way we're progressing. And at the moment, I see it as being effective and it's working. And I have the buy-in from those teachers, and now that word can spread. And it comes from sort of that ground level, so to speak. So those teachers spreading the word to the other teachers, say, well, this is what we did, and this is all it's about. It's just talking. It's just, and it's not about judging practice. It's about, well, what's best practice that we all know? And it's not about, well, you're doing this wrong in your class. It's about, well, as a cohort, I can see the key issues across lots of classes, and how do we address that as a group? It's not you as an island, it's the group, it's the village taking care of our students. And obviously being very flexible. Time, attitudes, definitely sort of managing that, being flexible about where to have a collaborative response meeting. Last year I did take the reins on, and it was such a difficult and tumultuous year for everyone. This year I want to make sure that we have that leadership team. It was so difficult to have our leadership team come together because we have 2 assistant principals who are on the leadership team who are actually on class as well. So they have so much to do and such a workload themselves. So trying to get them to come to another meeting, it was very, very challenging, trying to get everyone on board. So I think that's the biggest thing. When you get your leadership team, try really calendar in a meeting time together, and just look at your journey and look at, well, what do we need to do next? What do we need to do next? Sorry. That is vital to make sure it moves smoothly along, because as we know from collaborative response, more heads are better than one. Yeah, that's basically our journey, and I can't wait to sort of just delve into the next part of it and see where we go and see what we can do and the growth that we can make with our students.